Welcome to the Father on Purpose podcast, featuring author and ministry leader Kent Evans and business executive and military veteran Lawson Brown. This is a show for you, Dad. You want to be a godly and intentional father. Unfortunately, you've turned to these two knuckleheads for help. Let us know how that works out for you. Before we begin, remember this: you are not a father on accident. So go be a father on purpose. Please welcome your hosts, Kent and Lawson.
Lawson, I want to remind the dad who's listening that one of our close ministry partners is the ministry Better Man. And if you're looking for a curriculum for a small group or your church to go through that would help your men figure out what kind of men they need to be and how they can live this life in a way that honors God and where their marriages are stronger, their fatherhood is stronger, go check out the curriculum that Better Man has at betterman.com. We love those guys. I love their leadership. I know them well. We trust those guys. Go check it out. Today, Lawson, you and I are going to talk about a subject that I think is near and dear to the heart of every dad who will listen to this show, and that is how we guide our children through life's various experiences and how we help them process some of those life experiences as their guide and their helper, not as their judge or as their, criticizer, but as someone who can help them through that process. And so I'm really pumped about this subject today. How about you?
Yeah, me too. And I'm also excited that we got another voicemail through the website, which is just a reminder, you guys, go check out the website and go to the podcast page. There's a button you can click and we get a cool message from you, which is what has happened in this case about a guy that kind of does that. He makes an effort. He's making an effort at, I guess I would paraphrase Michael's voicemail saying he acts as a guide into the world with his children to help them understand what's going on and process it in a way that is safer, I think, because the dad is with the kids versus, son, daughter, go check that out and come back and report, he's walking the road with him. So, I just want to say I appreciate Michael Collins sending this to us because it's, I think it's good subject matter that a lot of guys are going to find interesting. I did, as well as I think helpful.
Yeah. And so two quick public service announcements before we play Michael's recording. One is go to manhoodjourney.org/podcast, manhoodjourney.org/podcast. You're going to find a button there that says something like start talking or record now, or hey pal, tell us what you think. There's something like that. And you click that button and you can just talk. It's so easy to send us a message. Those messages get all queued up for us, and then we go listen to them. And it's awesome because today you're going to hear from another dad like us, like you and me, a guy walking through life trying to figure it out. The second thing I would say is, okay, to be fair, Michael didn't just trip across this accidentally. There is a coffee shop in Louisville, Kentucky, where I live that I frequent, was actually just there today. And I bump into Michael at this coffee shop occasionally. Once every month or two, we'll see each other. And he bumped into me a few months ago and told me this story about something he does on occasion with his teenage boys. And I said, oh man, I really need you to send that to us on the podcast so we can play it. Because I know for a fact that other dads have this same challenge. And it comes to us in various forms, Lawson. Like we did surveys for years. And one of the things we hear back on surveys is give us some ideas to process like current events with our older kids, whether that's, race relations or economics or politics or whatever. Wow. Really fascinating. Dads want to help their kids process life through a biblical worldview and a Christian lens. And I just felt like Michael's approach was really clever and very intentional. And so I asked him, in fact, I bumped into him again at the same coffee shop a month later. He goes, oh man, I still haven't sent you that voicemail. So he finally got around to sending it, and we picked some pieces out of it for the sake of time. But what I want to do is I want to share with you guys a portion of what Michael
Yeah.
sent to us on the manhoodjourney.org/podcast. Here's what Michael had to say, and then we'll come back and unpack it together.
Hey, Kent, Michael Collins here. I have a 16-year-old and a 14-year-old that I pray for often and think about a lot on how to inundate them into the world without allowing them to get sucked into the world. Occasionally, I like to take my boys out just one-on-one or just me and them, and we'll go to maybe it is a restaurant and they have just a big bar and there's partying going on. We'll go watch a game. And I just sit there and I allow them to just watch. We'll have a meal. I don't drink because I don't want to give them the reason to say, hey, if dad drinks, I drink. And that if dad drinks one, maybe I should be able to drink two. And we'll sit there and we'll watch. And I'll ask them, I'll say, hey, what do you think? What are you doing? And we just have conversations about life. But we also look around as we're watching the game. We see other people that get obnoxious. We've seen people fight before. We've seen people that are just way off the chart, but we also see people that are cordial and they are respectful too. And we have those conversations. I like them to see proper ways, and also I like to see them what the standards are. So just a little thing that we've been doing several years now, but never too late to start, never too late to have that conversation, and just always looking for ways to help prepare our boys for the battleground, because it's very easy to get sucked into it. And number one, main thing is we always bring it back to God. Always bring it back to, hey, put your faith in Jesus. End of the day, you're going to mess up. I know that. There is redemption through him. And allowing them to see where others fall and help prevent those. Because it's a different angle when you can start early and you plant those seeds early.
So Lawson, one of the things I loved about what Michael said is kind of, for a moment, let's set aside exactly what he does and how often and when and so forth. But he is a very intentional dad. Like and I know he would probably bristle a little bit at too many compliments coming his way, but he seems to take this part of his job as a dad very seriously. And not that he even has to get it perfectly right, or not that every guy listening has to agree with every single thing Michael says about this topic, but man, he seems to me to be a very intentional dad in this regard. What did you have the same reaction when you heard it?
I did. Yeah, I appreciate that. I think what actually the method and the circumstance, that Michael explains, or this exact specific takeaway, even, that he arrived at in his case, is secondary to why he did it and what his intention is, what the intent of his involvement was. And I think it's important that we do that, especially as our kids are in their younger, more formative years, is like life is out there. The world is what it is. And there's no way to keep our kids from not experiencing some things that they're not going to be equipped to handle. Especially like, I know we've got some nieces and nephews that have gone through, let's say middle and high school, a good decade or two behind Audrey and I, and what they're experiencing, what they're going through is so much. I think it's much more intense nowadays than it was when we were growing up. Probably some of the same, stuff, but I don't know, man. It just feels like I have caught myself more and more often going, wow, I sure would not want to be, fill in the blank, a middle schooler today, or a high schooler, or going to college, or trying to raise a kid. It's just like, it just feels like there are some much more intense challenges nowadays. And so I like what Michael's intent is to say, my role as father is protector, is shepherd, and that means guide. Like let's take an opportunity, if it arises naturally as you're just out, whatever, traveling with your family, visiting other friends and family with your family, or going to run an errand, and you come across something. There's opportunities galore to kind of take a moment, recognize it, and and then debrief a little bit,
Oh,
and
yes.
pull out of your kids through questions. What did they see? It reminds me too, Kent, of like, it's almost some of these things where it can be, remember, begin with the end in mind. It can
Oh,
be
yeah.
like, we just saw something play out, son, daughter, and let's reverse the tape on that.
Mm.
Where did it start? What do you think? We see the end result wasn't an outcome that person would have wanted,
Yeah.
maybe. And here's an example, and I'll turn it back over to you. When the girls were, say, I think they were 15 or 16, wanted to go on an outdoor humongous concert, outdoor series concert, 3-day kind of thing. And
Like Woodstock? Was this like Woodstock?
it was, oh gosh, I can't think of the name of it, but yeah, I mean, it was like, no, nothing like that. Nothing crazy. that wouldn't have happened. But I like music, went with them, and I think they felt safer. They knew I was right around, so probably, hopefully, the desire to be, or the lack of temptation, or excuse me, the temptation was maybe less doable, because they knew that I was nearby. I don't know. I'm remembering back and thinking, had the answer been no, you can't go, you're too young, too much stuff going on there. Okay, what would that have done? Could have been okay. If the answer was, yeah, sure, go ahead, all alone, go for it, and then let's see what happens. That's not right either. So at the time, we decided kind of to land in the middle and let them go, pick and choose the times and accompany, so that we were able to be near enough by, if something happened, we could, jump in there with them.
Yeah.
But also to witness it for ourselves, so that in our case later on, we were able to kind of, like Michael did, like debrief and talk about the goods and the bads and the things they saw and the things they learned, and reinforce in those conversations some of our own values, obviously.
I sat down recently with Chris Harper. He's the executive director of Better Man Ministries. And I asked him a question about the state of manhood today. And his answer was both depressing and a bit hilarious. Check this out.
Yeah, it's a dumpster fire. That's what I would say the state of manhood is today. It's not just shaky, it's an absolute dumpster fire. The only categories that men are excelling in are terrible categories, like incarceration, suicide rates, depression rates, not attending church, things of that nature. Women are far and ahead excelling beyond men, whether it's graduation rates, college admittance rates, professional degrees, church attendance, spiritual growth. I mean, women are dominating, and it shouldn't be like that. So what's happened to men, in the 90s, we talked a lot about passivity, like men would just be passive. And I still think that's true. Like, we wrestle with passivity, but the reality is men are slow quitting their masculinity today. They're just kind of devolving into the background and becoming non-existent. And it's a serious problem that is affecting every facet of our society.
Better Man is one of our ministry partners. We love what Chris and his team there are doing. If you or your church is looking for a group study for your men to go through that covers the essentials of biblical manhood and helps men have a clear vision of how they can be as a man, they can gain confidence, become the man they want to be, improve relationships, and create a more purposeful life, check out the resources from our friends Better Man. You can find those at betterman.com. That's betterman.com. Well, what's interesting is the intentionality there is what I want to keep pointing our dad listener back to. Is I think sometimes we think as dads, we got to get it all perfect. And there's a lot of pressure to being a dad that we think, oh, I'm not doing it right, et cetera. And that's true, right? None of us are doing it perfectly. I remember there was this one perfect dad. If you remember how that story went, it was called the Garden of Eden, and then his kids rebelled, and then his grandkids murdered each other. Like, okay,
Exactly.
So even if you could hit Perfect Dad Mountain and get all the way to the top of Perfect Dad Mountain. You're not going to have perfect children. So at the end of the day, it's not about getting it perfect. I don't even think totally, Lawson, it's about necessarily feeding our children all of the answers to what they're observing. I want my kids to be critical consumers of information without being critics. And there's a fine distinction there. I think, you may have a job as a critic. I mean, if you're a food critic or movie critic, that's your job. I get it. But like, generally speaking, I don't want my kids to become just critics where they're just negative and they can find the fault. Finding fault in things is like, it's infantile. It's intellectual infantilism, right? It's so easy to find the fault in anything. The challenge is to find the good or to learn the lesson. One of the things that I love in the book of Hebrews 5:14 says it this way: but solid food is for the mature, for those who have their powers of discernment trained by constant practice to distinguish good from evil. I so love that verse of scripture.
Constant
Number
practice.
one, solid food is for the mature. So there's this idea that we are maturing as believers, right? It's the process of our sanctification over time. You're instantly saved, but you're also in the process of being sanctified until Jesus comes back or you die, one of the two. For those who have their powers of discernment trained, and when I hear the word train, I think of like physical, exercise, or you're in the military, you went through training camp. You went through training of certain skills when you were in the Marines. By constant practice. Oh my goodness. Was it John Wooden who said, everybody has the will to win, but not everybody has the will to prepare. And I love that quote.
That's
I'm probably
yeah.
I think I'm paraphrasing it. So don't send me hate emails if I got it not exactly right, but it's the idea that constant practice, and then it says to distinguish good from evil. And so I love that practice that Michael is exhibiting intentionally, helping his kids use the world, if you will, the world as a bit of a playground, to practice on and to do pull-ups on and to do push-ups on. Now there's an edge here. There's an edge here that you and I talked about before we started today's recording that we want to be a little cautious with. And the edge is, it's no surprise to go find the world acting like the world, right? I'm not going to go walk into the mall and go, hey, all you, we're recording this around the time of Christmas, you and I. Hey, all you eager, greedy, money spending fools, y'all should stop spending all that money on Christmas presents and get back to the real reason for the season. Like, I'm not going to go yell that in the middle of the mall, right? I mean, because our response as believers to the world, if you go looking through enough scripture, I think you find we're supposed to love the world, right? We're supposed to love the world. Jesus came not to judge. He came to serve. And however, there are scriptures, we often like to throw around this idea, oh, don't judge me. Who are you to judge? Well, actually, if you go looking through the New Testament, you'll find plenty of examples where, like this one in Hebrews, right? Constant practice distinguish good and evil. The idea of judging good versus evil is actually a commandment in the Christian faith, right? You got to be able to judge good and evil. I just don't judge who's going to heaven and hell. That's the judgment I'm excluded from. The one Jesus is talking about when he says, judge not. That's a judgment about who's going to heaven, who's going to hell. That's not my job. But my job is to figure out what's righteous and what's not righteous. What is wise and what is foolish. What is good? Like I'm told to walk worthy, right? Several places in the New Testament, walk worthy. Well, how am I going to walk worthy if I'm not judging between good and evil? And that's one of the things I loved. So, you and I talked about, just want to be careful with this idea of you and I could go run down to the nearest sports bar and find all kinds of people who are doing things that maybe they shouldn't be doing. But at the same time, I don't want to set the pattern for my own kids. Here's how we respond to the world, boys. We go look at them, we judge them, we laugh at them, we roll our eyes, and then we go back to church. And I know, beautiful thing is I know Michael really well. I know that is not at all what he would be trying to do. But there's this fine edge, right? Where we do want to take situations that unfold in life and help our kids run them through a biblical filter. But here's the power phrase I want to arm a dad with, right? You and I love to have a little fun, mention some scripture, and we love to be practical. Here's one very practical step. Sometimes I think when we are experiencing the world with our kids or experiencing any kind of challenge or input, we think we've got to get them to think about it exactly like we do, or they are wrong. And that may or may not be true. There's a lovely verse where Paul says, I hope you think on such things as I do. And if you don't, God will show you. It's a great verse. He's basically going, look, I'm right, and you need to come alongside me because I'm right. There are times when that's how we are as a dad. But the power phrase, man, is, hey, son, what do you think about that? or hey, honey, your daughter, that thing we just went to, that experience we just had, what do you think about it? And let them process with you how they think about it. Now, you may gently shape or guide maybe immaturity in their thought process or an error in their thought process, or they may even become little mini judges going, oh, that person is so evil. And you may be pulling them back. So you may gently guide them, but man, a power phrase is just see if you can get them to open up and share with you how they react. Have you had those experiences with your daughters, Lawson?
Yeah. And I think a good piece of that is to be a listener. Don't immediately after you ask the question, they start talking and you can't wait to jump to the lesson. Like, let it unfold a little bit. Let them talk it through. Let them think it out. And in that, I think is power in them, learning to diagnose, like what you had said earlier, kind of this controlled detonation. Let them think it through and go, okay, so I saw the behavior and I either saw or we can predict the consequence. Talk about that, ask about what do they think would play out, and then or maybe how do you think that began? What are some ways that could have begun? Not about the person that they may have witnessed do something necessarily, but about a potential scenario. And then what would you say if that was one of your friends? How would you, or if one of your buddies is trying to get you guys to do some of that, how do you handle that? How do you talk to them about that? How do you, what are some ways out if you find yourself on a path that is, you've kind of come to realize is not where you want to be? How do you get off of that? How do you get off that trek and maybe protect a friend or two in the process? When you wrote in the notes "controlled detonation" and just listening to you talk, I remember there is a day in boot camp where you go to the hand grenade range, and so what they could have done was we're all standing around getting ready to go through this outdoor classroom. Had they just thrown a grenade in the middle of everybody and kablam, it goes off, everybody would have learned a lesson of what a hand grenade could do. But they didn't, of course, obviously do that. You are one-on-one with an instructor, watching every step you take as you hold it correctly, as you pull the pin, as you release it, count to 2, overhand throw, and then it goes off into the safe space, into the range. But dude, you definitely get the understanding of what that thing could do if it were to go off in people. So in Michael's case, where he's kind of he's taking through a controlled situation to say there are some detonations that are going off or going to go off around those folks, and let's think about this and what that could do.
What's interesting, man, often what I feel like my job is as a dad is, to the extent that I told my son one time, I said, when you're under 10 years old, you live kind of minute by minute, or maybe day by day.
Yeah,
like
you've
right
talked
now,
about this before. I love it. Yep.
Right now we're waiting for Christmas, right? And the way my 7-year-old processes it is the number of sleeps until Christmas. Yeah. Right? Because he goes, 5 more sleeps till Christmas.
That's fun.
It's beautiful, right? It's beautiful. As you get older, even guys like you and me, right, in our 50s or whatever, we tend to think in terms of decades or lifetimes. We might even be thinking generationally. I'm thinking about Do I have this? Am I going to leave money to my kids that may or may not enable them to send their kids to college? Like I'm starting to think about that stuff, and time horizon gets longer. In the book of Philippians, Paul is trying to help the Philippians do this. Philippians 3, 17, starting here, just a few verses real quick. It says, brothers, join in imitating me. Keep your eye on those who walk according to the example you have in us. So Paul's like, hey, man, there's a right way to walk. There's a wrong way to walk. Keep your eye on the people who are walking smartly. And then verse 18, watch the pivot. For many of whom I've often told you and now tell you even with tears, time out. He says, for many of whom I've often told you. So this is not a new topic for Paul. It's not the first time he's ever brought this up. And he goes,
do you think he's like I said,
like I done
5 other times.
I told you every Saturday, I told you this. And so he says, and now tell you even with tears. So he's like doubling down.
Yeah.
Many walk as enemies of the cross of Christ, verse 18. And now watch what he says in verse 19. Their end is destruction. Their God is their belly, and they glory in their shame with minds set on earthly things. Man, what he's doing is he's saying, hey, look out the front window of this kind of behavior pattern. And let's play this movie out and see how it ends, right? I just finished watching the end of the World Cup. And this year people are saying, oh, best World Cup final ever, right? Goes into extra time, 3-3, these, soccer heavyweights in France and Argentina, goes to penalty kicks. If you haven't seen it, sorry, sucker, you should have already watched it. Argentina wins on PKs. Now, knowing that, if you go back and watch the game, you watch it very differently because you know how it ends. Not knowing that, oh my word, it was like this topsy-turvy emotional roller coaster where they would score and they would score. What we've got to help our kids do is look at life and kind of pause, fast forward, look ahead, and then come back and go, hey, their end is destruction. Now, is that the path we want to be on? Their end is selfishness. Their end is, broken marriages. Their end is financial ruin. That's where they're in. I'm not saying everybody who's not a believer. That's not what I'm saying. But I'm saying if you and I overspend our monthly budget every single month, you and I now are old enough to know what happens. We end up in bankruptcy court. We end up in jail. And so we know that. And now our job is to, in some cases, go back and tell our kids, hey, man, let's play this movie out. How do you see this ending? Even in their choices of friendships or what they consume in their body, to whether they exercise, to how much sleep they're getting. I've got a son in college, and we're always like, hey man, are you getting enough sleep? Why? Because we know if you don't get enough sleep, you're going to get sick. If you get sick, you can't make the grades. If you can't make the grades, you're going to be living in a van down by the river. And so don't want that to happen to him. So sorry.
You don't get enough sleep.
Matt Foley, motivational
What
speaker.
in the world?
Sorry. I just went into my Chris Farley for a second. And so for us as dads, I love this lesson Michael's painting. You mentioned, Lawson, as we were prepping today, you've taken your kids to some things like even a concert or life experiences. What are some things that if I were to grab your daughters on the show and say, hey, ladies, what did your dad kind of walk you through at some of these life experiences? Give a dad who's listening a practical idea or two for how he could use life circumstances to help his kids be smarter and be wise as serpents and harmless as doves, but without also being, a judgmental jerk who's kind of like always pointing a finger at other people. What are some ideas you have in that regard?
Remember coming back from dance practice many times. It was a good 30
you were
minute
dancing?
No.
Oh.
No. Olivia was a dancer.
Clear.
Yeah. That's clear.
I was having a little trouble picturing
sorry.
that.
I didn't tee that up very well.
Back to the show.
Jeez, boy. It was like, I think for us, middle school and early high school was some of the tougher situations. Fortunately for us, Audrey worked at the school. She was a sub. went in quite a bit, like to the point that she was kind of part of the theater program, and she would sub for various teachers. And the way it worked is you can kind of pick and choose which class that you want to be available for to go in, and she would kind of orchestrate it in a way that was the ones that the classes our daughters were in. But I remember in those ages, Olivia spent a lot of time around in a competitive environment where the situations were pretty challenging mentally, emotionally, physically, and getting like back in the truck after dance class. It's basically a 3-hour workout, adrenaline's high. That was when she was talkative, and I could just kind of easily lob questions out there and just be quiet, and not every one of them was a do or die kind of heavy duty situation. I think my point is in practicality, and like Hebrews 5:14 says, discernment trained by constant practice. You can practice having these conversations with your kids when the stakes are maybe not so high. Like let it be a normal thing to be talking. Audrey, when she substituted, was always they would go to school together and they would ride home together. And Audrey could see other kids and maybe even some other parents of other kids presenting situations that were ripe for discussion among us, and she would use those times to say, hey, did you catch the other day so-and-so happened, or this and that happened? And it was just a normal course of life that for whatever reason, kind of in the car, yields itself to easy conversations. And so that then when it maybe does, a situation is more heavy duty, you're used to, the two of you are used to having heart to hearts and good conversations.
The other thing, man, that's great, man. And one thing you observed in that process was kind of when your daughter was more or less willing to talk. Like, that's a really clever, I don't want to let that just kind of breeze on by. Sometimes, actually funny, last night, I wanted to go have a conversation with a member of my family, and I went to leave our bedroom to do it. And my wife goes, do not leave the bedroom. And what she was warning me against was, late at night conversations about after long days at work,
it doesn't have to happen right now.
It doesn't.
Pick your moment.
And
that's right.
And I got to pick my moment. I remember the other thing we can do in that regard is some of this comes off as we're watching what goes bad in the world, so to speak, and we're processing what goes bad. We can also watch what goes right.
Yeah, that's right.
So as an example, I will often leave a sermon at our church, and we'll have a conversation about, man, did you see what he did there? It was so good at that moment when and so I'm not always looking for, gotcha, the negative side of life and helping my kids process how not to live. I'm surrounded by godly and faithful men and women that I bump into week after week. And often I'm with my kids, and one of the things I want to do with them is help them notice the things that people do well, right? So I might be standing talking to a guy who's my peer, and my son is there, and that guy says something encouraging to me. And then as we walk away, I'll elbow my son on the shoulder and go, hey man, did you notice he encouraged me?
Right on.
Did you notice that? Because that was cool. And so there's a part of life where we're helping our kids deal with
I'm glad you said that.
Craziness, and we're trying to process it. But there's also this part of life where, man, there's gems we're walking past every day that if we're observant, we can help our kids notice that as well. So Dad, listen, take Michael's advice and do two things. Number one, be an intentional dad who helps your kids process life, whether you kind of go out with an errand to do it on purpose, or you're just catching as catch can because you're observant. Make it happen, because your kids need a guide. They need a wise shepherd who's going to help them avoid dashing their feet on the same dumb rocks over and over. So Dad, get in there and be intentional. And then second, go to manhoodjourney.org /podcast and leave us a message about having done that thing. Let's
Right
not
on.
let Michael be the only cool dad in the world. You too are a cool dad. So get out there and let us know. Seriously, we love. I would love nothing more than for 2023 to be full of live dad feedback in the podcast army. And we've had way over 20-something thousand downloads. So there's a lot of dads out there listening who do have ideas and thoughts, and some of them aren't horrible. Maybe that's you. So hop on to manhoodjourney.org /podcast and let us know your brilliant idea for how you too are being an intentional dad, so we can all learn from you like we learned today from Michael. And thanks again to Michael for the awesome voicemail. We're super grateful. God bless you guys. We'll see you next week.
Hey, Dad, thank you for listening to today's show. If you found this episode helpful, remember, you can get all the content and show notes at manhoodjourney.org /podcast. And if you really liked it, please consider doing 3 things. Number 1, share this podcast with someone. You can hit the share button in your app, wherever you listen to podcasts, or just call a person up and tell them to listen in. Number 2, subscribe to this podcast so you get episodes automatically. That helps us as well to help dads find the show. You can do that through your favorite listening app, whatever that is. And finally, review this podcast. Leave us a review, good or bad, wherever you listen. Those reviews also help other dads find the show. You can always learn more about what we're up to at manhoodjourney.org or fatheronpurpose.org. We will see you next week.
You've been dozing off to the Father on Purpose podcast featuring Kent Evans and Lawson Brown. Now, wake up. Head over to fatheronpurpose.org for more tools that can help you be a godly, intentional, and not completely horrible dad. Remember, you are not a father on accident, so go be a father on purpose.